Memoirs illustrating the history of Jacobinism from Barruel. Part 1. The Anti-Christian Conspiracy. Chapter 1. Of the principal actors in the conspiracy. About the middle of the century appeared three men who were leagued in the most inveterate hatred against Christianity. These were Voltaire, d'Alembert, and Frederick II, King of Prussia. Voltaire hated religion because he was jealous of its author and of all those whom it had rendered illustrious, d'Alembert because his frigid heart was incapable of affection, and Frederick because he had never seen it before but through the medium of its enemies. To these a fourth must be added, and this was Diderot, hating religion because he doted on nature and enthusiastically wedded to the chaos of his own ideas. He chose rather to build a system on chimeras and form mysteries of his own, than submit to the light of the gospel. Numerous adepts were afterward drawn into this conspiracy, and these were generally stupid admirers or secondary agents. Voltaire was the chief, d'Alembert the most subtle agent, and Frederick the protector and often the adviser, and Diderot the forlorn hope. Mary Frances Arouet was born in Paris, February 20th, 1694, the son of an ancient notary of the Châtelet, though through vanity he changed his name to that of Voltaire, which he deemed more noble, more sonorous, and better suited to the celebrity at which he aimed. And never had there appeared a man with such versatile talents, and such a thirst of dominion over the literary world, gravity of manners, a contemplative mind, or a genius for discussion or deep research, unfortunately were not among the gifts which nature had lavished on him, and more unfortunately still, in his heart were engendered all those baleful passions which render abilities dangerous. From his youth he seemed to direct them all at the overthrow of religion. While only a student of rhetoric in the college of Louis le Grand, he drew on himself the following rebuke from his professor, the Jesuit Le Jay: "Unfortunate young man, at some future day you will come to be the standard bearer of infidelity." Never was oracle more literally fulfilled. On leaving college he neither sought nor loved any other society than that of men whose profligate morals could strengthen his own infidelity. He was particularly intimate with Richelieu, a poet of voluptuousness, the Anacreon of his day, and with a few Epicureans who held their meetings at the Hotel de Vendôme. His first essays were in satire, which gave offense to the government, and in tragedy, in which we should have seen the rival of Corneille, Racine, and Crébillon, had he not at the same time emulated Celsus and Porphyrius, with all the other enemies of religion. At a time when licentiousness in opinion still met with obstacles in France, he sought an asylum in England. He there found men whom the writing of Shaftesbury, commented on by Bolingbroke, and trained up in deism. He mistook them for philosophers, and was persuaded that they alone were esteemed by the English. If he was not then mistaken, opinions are since greatly changed. All those sophisters whom Voltaire extols as the glory of Great Britain, if not forgotten, are more despised than read. Collins and Hobbes, when remembered, are classed with Tom Paine. An Englishman's good sense does not allow him to hate religion, nor make an ostentatious display of impiety. With him nothing is less philosophical, notwithstanding his toleration and variety of creeds, than that affected hatred to Christianity which marks our sophisters, and which more practically characterizes their plans to overthrow it. Philosophisme is said to have originated in England. I deny the fact. Philosophisme is the error of every man who, judging of all things by the standard of his own reason, rejects in religious matters every authority that is not derived from the light of nature. It is the error of every man who denies the possibility of any mystery beyond the limits of his reason, of every one who, discarding revelation in defense of the pretended rights of reason, equality, and liberty, seeks to subvert the whole fabric of the Christian religion. Such an error may constitute a sect. The history of the ancient Jacobinism demonstrates that the sect existing long since, but it was shrunk back to its dark abodes at the time when Voltaire appeared. Such an error may be that of a few individuals. Many of the same sort had been broached during the two last centuries. Numerous were the sects which had sprung from Luther and Calvin, each making its own partial assault on the ancient tenets of Christianity. When at length there arose a set of men who attacked them all and would believe nothing, these were at first styled libertines, the only denomination they deserved. Voltaire might everywhere have met with some of these men, but more particularly at France under the regency of the Duke of Orleans, who, though himself a monster of libertinism, yet feeling the necessity of religion to the state, would not suffer to be impugned in their publications. It was in England, it is true, where under their Collins and their Hobbes the libertines first styled themselves philosophers, and assumed the character of deep thinkers, supported probably by some impious productions which in any other part of the Christendom would neither have enjoyed equal publicity nor even impunity. But it may be certainly concluded that Voltaire would everywhere have been that he became in England. He would have been so, at least, wherever, from the lenity of the laws, he could cherish his insatiable appetite for the dominion over the empire of science or of literature. It was in vain for him to aspire at the reputation of a Bossuet or a Pascal, or to affect the blaze of genius which had shone forth in defense of religion, but hating their cause and envying their glory, he dared to be jealous of their God. At their empire, therefore, he levelled his bows, and would be foremost in the ranks of the philosophists. He succeeded, but to keep his preeminence blushed not to blend philosophy with impiety, and deliberately to contrive means for the overthrow of religion. England was the place where he first conceived a possibility of success. Condorcet, his adept, his confidant, his historian, and his panegyrist, asserts this in positive terms. There it was, in England, that Voltaire swore to dedicate his life to the accomplishment of that project, and he has kept his word. On his return to Paris about the year 1730, he made so little a secret of his design. He had published so many writings against Christianity, and was sanguine in his hopes, that Mr. Harnaud, the lieutenant of police, upbraided him one day with his impiety, and added, "You may do or write what you please, but you will never be able to destroy the Christian religion." Voltaire without hesitation answered, "We shall see that." Stimulated by the obstacles he met with, and perceiving much glory in his enterprise, he would not willingly have shared it with anybody. "I am weary," he would say, "of hearing people repeat that 12 men were sufficient to establish Christianity, and I will prove that one may suffice to overthrow it." When he uttered these words, his malignity seemed to blind him to such a degree as to hide from him the immense distance between the genius that creates and the petty cunning of the mischievous monkey that destroys. The sophister may conjure the clouds, or veil the world in darkness, but does not by that approach the God of truth. The virtues, the miracles, and all the divine knowledge of the apostles were necessary to teach man the true path of life. Although in his outset Voltaire flattered himself that he should enjoy alone the glory of destroying the Christian religion, which was his sole object, he nevertheless soon found that associates would be necessary. He even began to fear the noise of his undertaking, and hence resolved to move in the sure though humbler sphere of a conspirator. Already his numerous writings, either impious or obscene, had gained him many admirers and disciples who, under the name of the philosophers, prided themselves in the hatred they bore to Christianity. From these he chose D'Alembert as the most proper person to second him in his new plan of attack, and he could not have chosen better. Among the sophisters, we should compare Voltaire to Agamemnon, and D'Alembert to Ulysses. If the comparison be too noble, see the latter cunning, cringing, and even yelping like the fox, born of Fontenelle according to some, of Astruc the physician according to others. The birth was always a mystery to him. His mother Claudina Alexandrina Guérine de Tencin, an apostate nun from the convent of Montfleury in Dauphiny, was at the head of one of those societies of men of letters which were common in Paris, and she used to style them her beasts. Whether designed to conceal his birth or not is unknown, but certainly it is that in the night between the 16th and 17th of November 1770 he was found wrapped in wadding clothes in the portico of the small church of St. John, and hence obtained the name of Jean le Rond, at the founding hospital whither he was carried and in which he was bred. While yet a youth, he enlisted under the banners of infidelity, thereby repaying with ingratitude the church that had charitably reared him. With the small sums given him for his education, he bought, like many other young men, all the profligate works written against a religion. From those proofs they impatiently flee, as wicked boys calumniate the kind masters who thwart their evil dispositions. Both his heart and his mind led him to be a disciple of Voltaire, and even their diversity of character and the immense difference of talents were soon confounded in their mutual bias to infidelity and confirmed hatred to Christianity. Voltaire was fierce, passionate, and impetuous; D'Alembert cold, reserved, prudent, and crafty. Voltaire was fond of show; D'Alembert almost feared to be seen. The one, like the chief who is obliged to mask his battery, reluctant, used dissimulation, while he wished to wage open war with Christianity, and die on a heap of Christians whom he terms bigots, immolated at his feet. The other, by instinct a dissembler, waged war like a partisan who from behind a bush smiles to see his enemy fall into the snares he has led. Voltaire, transcendent in polite literature, was but superficial in mathematics. In the latter, D'Alembert was profound. Indeed, he owned all his reputation to them, for in everything else he was a dry, financial, and confused writer, sometimes as mean and vulgar as Voltaire is noble, easy, and elegant. He would plod to turn a bag epigram, while the latter would have wittily filled whole volumes. Voltaire, impudently daring, whether for or against, would quote the scriptures, history, or the Holy Fathers, affirming, inventing, or traducing the passages as he wanted, for to wound was his only aim. D'Alembert carefully guards against the reply that may expose him. His steps, mysterious and indirect, conceal his design. Shrieking from refutation, if attacked, he flees, suppressing the fight lest he should proclaim his defeat. Voltaire, on the contrary, seeks his enemies and loudly calls them out. Though 100 times defeated, he returns to the charge. Though his error be refuted, he will incessantly repeat it. It is not in defeat, but in flight alone, that he sees disgrace. And thus, after a war of 60 years, we still see him raging on the field of battle. D'Alembert seeks the smile of every little assembly, and the applause of 40 men in the academical circle constitutes his greatest triumph, while all the world, from London to St. Petersburg, from Sweden to America, to please Voltaire, must sound his fame. D'Alembert enlists from around him the secondary adepts. He trains and initiates them, directs their missions, and holds very pretty correspondence. Voltaire will conjure kings, emperors, ministers, and princes against his God. All must do homage to the Sultan of Infidelity. Among these latter personages, history must distinguish that Frederick, which as yet it has only known by titles glorious to monarchs, whether conquerors or rulers. In this Frederick II, the Solomon of the North, according to the sophisters, we see two distinct men. First, that king of Prussia, that hero less worthy of our admiration, displaying his vast military talents in the field of victory, than as the father of his people, giving life to agriculture and energy to commerce, protecting the arts, and counterpoising in some sort by the justice and wisdom of his administration, exploits perhaps more brilliant than just. In the second, so beneath a monarch, we see the sophister, the philosophic pedant, the conspirator of infidelity, less cruel and enthusiastic indeed than Julian the apostate, but much more artful and perfidious. It is painful to disclose the dark mysteries of this impious prince, but history must be true, and herein especially. To trace the conspiracy against their thrones, kings must know what share their colleagues have had in the conspiracy against the altar. Frederick, born with a mind worthy of Celsus or his school, had not the help of a Justin or a Tertullian to guide his steps in religion, and unfortunately was surrounded by its calumniators. While only Prince Royal, he was in correspondence with Voltaire, chiefly on religion or metaphysics, and even at that early age it appears he demeaned himself a philosopher. For he says, "To speak with my usual freedom, I must confess to you that whatever regards the God made man displeases me in the mouth of a philosopher, who should be above popular error. Leave to the great Corneille, when doting and falling back to childhood, the insipid talk of versifying the imitation of Christ, and whatever you may give us, let it be your own. We may speak of fables merely as fables, and a profound silence, in my opinion, should be kept concerning those fables of the Christians, which have been sanctified by time and the credulity of the absurd and stupid. Even his first letters we find with the ridiculous pride of a pedantic king, all the versatility and hypocrisy of a sophister. Frederick denies when Voltaire supports liberty. With Voltaire, man is a pure machine. Frederick then maintains that man is free. In one place, we are free precisely because we can form a clear idea of freedom. In another, man is all matter. Yet one can hardly form, though it were with Frederick's own versatility, a more absurd idea than that of matter thinking, free, or arguing. He upbraids Voltaire with the praises that he had bestowed on Christ, and 3 years after he is not ashamed to write, "For my part, I own that, whatever people may enlist under the banners of fanaticism, I never shall. I may indeed compose a few psalms to raise a good opinion of my orthodoxy. Socrates incest that household gods, so did Cicero, and he was not credulous. We must give way to the fantasies of the frivolous people, in order to avoid blame and persecution, for, after all, that is most desirable in the world is to live in peace. Let us then live foolishly with fools, that we may live quietly." The same Frederick had written that the Christian religion yielded none but poisonous weeds, and Voltaire had congratulated him as having above all princes fortitude of soul, with sufficient perspicacity to see that for the 1700 years past the Christian sect had never done anything but harm. Though we afterwards find him the opponent of that work of philosophic insight, or rather the infamous profligacy, the system of nature. One might be tempted, he says, to suspect its author of want of sense and skill then culminating the Christian religion. He imputes to its failings that is has not. How can he with truth assert that religion can be the cause of the misfortunes of mankind? He would have been more correct if he simply said that men from ambition and self-interest, concealed under the veil of religion, had sought to disturb the world and gratify their passions. That is more reprehensible in the morals of the commandments. Where were there in the gospel, the whole gospel, but this single precept, "Do as thou wouldest be done by," we should be obliged to confess that those few words contain the whole acquiescence of morality. The forgiveness of injuries, charity, and humanity were not these preached by Jesus in his excellent Sermon on the Mount. When he wrote thus, how much had Frederick lost of his perspicacity, which had so lately distinguished him from other princes? But strange to say, after having viewed religion in so clear a light, he compliments Voltaire on being its scourge. He still communicates plans for its destruction, and foresees that should it be preserved to protected in France, the fine arts and higher sciences must fall, and that the rust of superstition will completely destroy a people otherwise amiable and born for society. Had this sophistical monarch really foreseen events, he would have seen that people, otherwise amiable and born for society, when it had lost its religion, terrifying all Europe with its horrid creeds. But like Voltaire, he was to be the sport of his pretended wisdom. He was of his philosophy, and though we shall often see him judging shrewdly of his adepts, we shall always find him conspiring with them against the religion of Christ. The correspondence was that so clearly develops the two characters of the royal adept and of his idol Voltaire begins in 1736, and it was uninterrupted during their lives. Some few years of the latter's disgrace exempted, it is in this correspondence that we must contemplate him, incredulous and impious, divesting himself of his royal insignia. He is more emulous of a philosophist than he was jealous of the Caesars, and to rival Voltaire becomes his servile copyist, a poet beneath mediocrity, a metaphysician on the lower form. He excels in but two things, his admiration for Voltaire and his impiety. In the latter, he often outgoes his master. In consideration of his zeal and homage, Voltaire overlooked his caprice, and the rough usage he sometimes met with, even to the correction of the cane inflicted on him by a major at Frankfort by order of his despotic sophister, was too essential that the sect should secure at any expense the support of a royal adept, and we shall see how very much he served them. But first, in order to ascertain the excellence of their mutual hatred of Christianity, let us attend to the vast obstacles they overcome. Let us hear Voltaire pathetically describing his sufferings at Berlin a few years after his arrival, in a letter to Mad. Dennis, his niece and confidant, he says, La Métairie may in his prefaces extol his extreme felicity in being with a great king who sometimes reads his poetry to him, yet in private he weeps with me. He would willingly return, though it were on foot. But why am I here? I will astonish you. This La Montherie, a man of no consequence, chats familiarly with the king when their readings are over. He speaks to me with confidence. He declared to me that taking to the king a few days ago of my supposed favor with his majesty, and of the jealousy it excited the king, had answered, I shall certainly not want him above a 12-month longer. A squeeze the orange and then throw away the rind. I made him repeat these consolatory words. I questioned him again and again, but he only reiterated his declaration. I have done my utmost not to believe La Montherie, and yet, in reading over the king's verses, I found an apostle to one of his painters called Père, which begins thus. Quel spectacle étonnant vient de frapper mes yeux, cher père, ton passant égal au rang des dieux. Tell me, what sight has struck my wandering eyes, thy skill, dear père, with God's immortal vise. Now this père is a fellow of whom he takes no notice, and yet he is the dear père. He is God. He is a god. He may perhaps see me in the same light, and that is not saying much. You may easily guess that reflections, that a recoil upon myself, and what perplexity, nay, that anxiety his declaration of La Meurtrie's has created within me. This first letter was sometimes after succeeded by a second, as follows. My sole views at present are to desert in a genteel manner, to take care of my health, to see you again, and forget this 3 years' dream. I plainly perceive the orange has been squeezed, and must think of saving the rind. For my own instruction, I will compile a dictionary for the use of kings. My friend signifies my slave. My dear friend, as much as to say you are to me more than indifferent. You are to understand by I will make you happy. I will bear with you as long as I shall have need for you. Sup with me tonight means I make game of you tonight. This dictionary might be carried on to great length, and be not worthy a space in the encyclopedia. Seriously, this distresses me. Can there be truth in what I have seen? What delights in taking mischief among those that live with him, to say everything that is kind to a person, and write pamphlets against him, to lure a man from his country by the most endearing expressions and solemn promises, and treats him with a blackest malice? What contrasts! And this is the man who wrote in such a philosophic strain that I mistook him for a philosopher, and styled him the Solomon of the North. Do you remember that fine letter which never pleased you? You are a philosopher, he said, and so am I. Upon my word, sire, as the two philosophers, we are neither of us so. Voltaire never spoke more truthfully. Neither Frederick nor he could pretend to philosophy in its true acceptation, but they were eminently so in the sense of the conspirators, with whom impiety and hatred to Christianity constituted its whole sole essence. It was soon after writing this last letter that Voltaire stole away from the court of his disciples, and receiving at Frankfurt that corporal correction which made him the laughingstock of all of Europe, established, however, at Ferney. He soon forgot the bastinado. Frederick was once more the Solomon of the North, and returned the compliment by saluting Voltaire as the father of philosophy. Though not in friendship, they were soon united in mutual hatred to Christianity, and though they never met again, their plans were more easily formed, and intelligently conducted in their future correspondence. As to Diderot, he flew spontaneously toward the conspirators. A heated brain and enthusiastic rage for that philosophism of which Voltaire had set the fashion, a confusion of ideas, the more evident as both his speech and pen followed all the explosions of his brain, pointed him out to D'Alembert as a man essential to the conspiracy, and who would say, or could be made to say, such things as he dared not speak himself. They were both, until death, as truly attached to Voltaire as the latter was to Frederick. Had anything but chaos been to have succeeded to Christianity, had any doctrine whatsoever been to have been taught, never were 4 men less fitted for such an undertaking. Voltaire leaned to deism, and seemed for some time to have adopted it, but insensibly falling into Spinoza's systems, he knew not what to believe. Consulting at one time D'Alembert At another Frederick, he was during the remainder of his life a prey to remorse. If doubts and anguish of mind void of repentance can be so called, at nearly fourscore he expresses himself in the following manner: Doubts encompass us round, and doubting is a disagreeable state. Is there a God such as he is said to be? A soul such as he is imagined? Analogies such as are laid down? Is there anything to be hoped for after this his life? This Gilmer in the right to laugh, though stripped of his dominions, when brought before Justinian, or Cato in preferring suicide to the sight of Caesar? Is glory then but an illusion? Shall Mustafa, in the effeminacy of his harem, beaten, ignorant, proud, and committing every folly, be happier, provided he digest well, than the philosopher who digests ill? Are all men equal before the great being that animates nature? In that case, could the soul of Ravaillac be equal to that of Henry IV? Or had neither of them a soul? Let the heroic philosophers unravel all this. For my part, I can make nothing of it. D'Alembert and Frederick, being alternately pressed by these questions, answered each after his own way. Unable to fix his own opinion, the former frankly confesses he has not the gift of solving them. I own to you, he says, that concerning the existence of God, the author of the system of nature seems too warm and dogmatic, and on this subject skepticism seems the most rational. What do we know about it? As with me, an answer to most metaphysical questions, and the natural reflection must be that since we know nothing of the matter, it is doubtless unnecessary that we should know more. This remark on the unimportance of these questions was added, lest Voltaire, worried out by the anxiety of his mind, should forsake a philosophy unable to solve his doubts on questions by no means, in his opinion, indifferent to the happiness of man. Voltaire still insists, but D'Alembert, continuing in the same style, says, no, the metaphysics appears to me not much wiser than yes, and non liqué, it is not clear, in generally the only rational answer. Frederick was as impatient of doubts as Voltaire, and perpetually wishing to stifle them, he was at length persuaded that he had succeeded. A philosopher of my acquaintance, says he, a man pretty bold in his opinions, thinks that we have a sufficient degree of probability to constitute a certainty that post mortem nihil est, or that death is an eternal sleep. He maintains that man is not twofold, but is only matter animated by motion, and his strange man says that there exists no relation between animals and the supreme intelligence. This bold philosopher, this strange man, was Frederick himself, and a few years after he makes no secret of it, he more decidedly writes, I am well convinced that I am not twofold, hence I consider myself as a single being. I know that I am an animal organized, and that thinks, hence I conclude that matter can think, as well as that it has the property of being electric. Verging toward his grave, but wishing to inspire Voltaire with confidence, he writes again, the gout has successively run over all my body. Our frail machines must needs be destroyed by time, which consumes everything. My foundations are undermined, but all this gives me very little concern. As the fourth hero of the conspiracy, the famous Diderot, he is the very person whose decisions against God D'Alembert found too warm and dogmatic, though oftentimes in the same work we find him, after deciding against the deist, arguing in the same peremptory manner for or against the sceptic and the atheist. But whether writing for or against a god, he always appears free from doubts or anxieties. He fairly wrote what he thought at the moment, whether he crushed the atheists with the weight of the universe and asserted that the eye of a mite with the wing of a butterfly was sufficient to defeat them, or declared that glorious display did not give him even the most distant idea of anything divine, and that this universe was but the fortuitous result of motion and matter. Whether, then, the existence of God was to be left in doubt, scepticism at all times and in all places can alone preserve us from the two opposite excesses. Or he praised God for the sceptics, because he sees they all want light. Whether, in short, to form a sceptic, it was necessary to have a head as well organized as that of Montaigne the philosopher. Never was a man more peremptory when affirming or denying any point, more perfectly avoid of the constraint of care, or the more impervious to remorse, for he was a perfect stranger to them, even when asserting positively that between him and his dog he knows of no other difference but their dress. With these extravagancies in their religious opinions, we find Voltaire, impious and tormented by his doubts and ignorance, D'Alembert impious but calm in his, while Frederick impious and triumphant, or thinking he had triumphed over his ignorance, left God in heaven, provided there were no souls on earth. And Diderot, by turns atheist, materialist, deist, and sceptic, but ever impious, and ever frantic, was the better fitted for the various parts he was doomed to act. Such were the men whose characters and whose errors were necessary to be known in such order as to ascertain the conspiracy, of which they were the chiefs. Of this existence, of which we shall give undeniable proof, definite its precise object, and unfold its means and progress. That was Chapter 1 of Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism by Barruel. If you have enjoyed this reading and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing. It would be greatly appreciated. And on to next time for Chapter 2 of the existence, object, and extent of the anti-Christian conspiracy.